Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut Shop. Welcome to this beautiful 1999 Toyota Land Cruiser 100 Series. So you guys have seen this truck in the back of the shop for some time now. We finally got a chance to open it up. We have some head gasket issues. Not very common with these and something that surprised me initially, but let me show you where we're at with this truck and everything in between right after this. Well, let's go to the front and take a look. So right now we have the cylinder heads out, but before we get into that, and you notice half the engine is missing, and we're going to talk about this in a second, let me run you through how this truck ended up in the shop and kind of what the owner was experiencing. So the owner of this truck uses this truck mainly for overlanding, not really a daily driver or whatnot. This thing has absolutely no rust, nothing. So they really take care of this. I mean, this thing has over 200,000 miles. It's pristine. That's the word for it. Inside, out, everywhere. They started noticing a mysterious coolant loss. So initially, top it off, look, check around. Nothing really is leaking. You notice they actually replaced the heater T's. This is a common thing with these. Didn't stop the leak. We still have a coolant loss. Then something that they've done throughout the life of the truck, they always sent oil for oil analysis. They just wanted to see how the oil was doing. All of a sudden, the next oil change, the oil analysis came back with a significant amount of coolant in the oil. That was something new because they've been tracking it. So that's when we came about with the head gasket. This truck ran perfectly fine. I mean, absolutely perfect. No issues, no misfires, nothing really much going on with it. But we have a very small head gasket leak. And the problem with head gasket leaks like that is it was not enough for us to really detect gas in the radiator, for example, combustion gases in the radiator. So I boroscoped the cylinders at the time when we were doing the diagnosis to see if we can see one of these cylinders steamed. Nothing. So basically what we have talked to this customer is we might have a very small head gasket leak, but we're kind of going in blind. And this was something he was okay with. He just wanted the head gaskets done. And if we saw something in the way, we will take care of it because he really wants to keep this truck as he has kept it all this time. It's really in beautiful shape. Well, we have the heads off. Let's take a look. So if you haven't seen it, this is the 2UZ FE without the cylinder heads on it. What a beautiful engine. This is, folks, this is one of the best engines Toyota ever made and ever will make. This comes from a different time era where things were they were done differently. So here's what we have though. Before we get into that though, I want to show you this beautiful crosshatch at 200,000 miles. The cylinder is just beautiful. Does have a little bit of wear, of course, 200,000 miles. But nothing you can feel with your fingernail. I have crosshatch all across. Same thing on this side. So here's the mystery with this one. And that's when we moved to the mystery. This we already cleaned. This was not how this looked like because I wanted to check that things were flat, and they are. So we are good here. But let me show you the cylinder head. So this cylinder head we've already cleaned. If you come around and show them this side, this one we already cleaned. This is an aluminum cylinder head on a cast iron block. Here's the head gasket out of this side. Honestly, I don't see any areas where this head gasket would have, like you can see a clear sign of it going across. The reason for that is this is not completely blown. Although there was some coolant, visible coolant in the oil, like you can see a little bit of milkiness, and we'll show you that in the next cylinder head, but there was not a lot. But here's where I'm at with this. What I think caused this, and this is the biggest thing, why did this happen? This truck never overheated, really taken care of. I think it's just age. And if you look at this head gasket, look at this black coating. It's literally peeling off. This black coating, unfortunately, it comes to a point where it just starts coming apart and it compromises the gasket. This is a multi-layer steel gasket, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. is the coating. So what ends up happening is, for example, the coating wears between the coolant jacket and here, and it just starts seeping through because we're not leaking a lot to a point where it overheats this engine, or to a point where, you know, we have combustion gases in the coolant and things are not running right. No, it's running perfectly fine. Even when you pressurize the cooling system, I remember this has been a while when we diagnosed this, but you pressurize it, you don't actually get coolant in the cylinders, and that's the first thing I looked at. Because what happens with cars that have head gasket leaks, that leak coolant into the cylinder, like let's say you have a little, this is a coolant jacket, you have a little passage here that made its way through. Well, if you pressurize the cooling system, eventually coolant, you'll see driplets on the cylinder wall, and they'll pile up on top of the cylinder. So when you start it the next morning, it's going to run a little rough, it's going to smoke white until it clears up that coolant that's sitting on the cylinder, then it runs fine. This one actually didn't even do that. So that's, we obviously have coolant coming from somewhere here, but not out of the large quantities. Something about this cylinder head, this one we already cleaned. I'm going to show you in the next one that we didn't clean, but I don't see a reason to send this to a machine shop, and this is something I see a lot of shops do. I have to say this. Sorry, shops, you're trying to do the right thing. Problem is, good machine shops are very difficult to find. It's a dying art, if you would. I have one machine shop that we work with. They are very far away. They're probably an hour and a half, 2 hours away. And the logistics of going back and forth, unless I need it, I won't. We talked about in the previous video about the white Supra that you guys also seen in the background. That engine is at that machine shop getting work done to it because it needs it. This one, I don't see a need for it, and let me show you why. There's a little bit of science involved in this, and if you do your homework right, there's no need to be just for the sake of looking, the surface looking absolutely beautiful, send it to a machine shop. Because the problem with that is, if you send it to a good machine shop, it'll be perfect. If you send it to a machine shop that is not experienced, their equipment's old, they don't really stay on top of their equipment, you can actually create problems. And that's the problem. This engine never overheated. So I don't see a reason why we're going to send this just to make it look pretty to a machine shop and get it surfaced. And now, even though this is not a VBTI engine, now you have to change the thickness from the original of the head gasket to get a thicker one because you have to compensate. It just, if we don't need it, we don't need it. This is not something that's a must. People have made it a point that this is a must. It is not. And here's how we check that. So basically, what we're trying to find out here is this surface perfectly flat? There's actually a specification. It needs to be 2/1000, maximum warpage is 2/1000 of an inch. And the way we're going to check this is a straight edge. So this edge is a machined surface, perfectly machined. This, I've owned this for a very long time. I treat it like one of my kids because if you drop this, it is garbage. It needs to be remachined and recalibrated. I've never dropped this in a very long time. So the first thing we're going to do is the specification. The specification on this engine is 2/1000. Anything over that, that is too much warpage for service. So we're going to pull a 2/1000. So once I find it and my eyes work with me here, 2/1000 of an inch. I hope you can see that on camera. 2/1000 of an inch, 0.05 millimeter. You notice this is like almost like it's smaller than paper, and that's exactly what it is. We already cleaned the surface because you can't have remnants of the old gasket sitting here. It's going to give you an erroneous reading. We cleaned the surface well, and we're going to clean our straight edge. First location is right in the middle. You have this sitting here. If you have a low spot here, this can go through. And you notice it does not. Because if this is warped down, you're going to have a little opening here. Because this is not, and the rest is not. And this will go through. Same thing here. It's not going through. Same thing here. Same thing here. See, if you tilt this, it'll go through. You got to make sure you're straight on it. This is not going through. Now there's multiple measurements. This is not the only one. Actually, it lists this in the book exactly where you need to measure to make sure warpage. Well, I'm going to take this to the next level. And this, I usually do this with engines when we're checking them for head gasket issues. We're going to go 15 thousandths. So now if this engine has a little bit of warpage that is within spec, the cylinder head, we're going to know about it. And let's check it. This doesn't go through. This doesn't go through. Let's check it the full way through. Well, we don't have any warpage. So you tell me, why would I take the cylinder head that otherwise is perfectly fine, doesn't have warpage, all within spec, to a machine shop, spend $300, $400, sometimes $700 of my customers' money to do absolutely nothing? That's the reality, folks. Do we have a problem here? No. Now the other question is, do we have cracks? That's a very good question. But if you have a crack here, you would have a much more severe leak. And this is an aluminum head. Yes, machine shops will try to fix them. It's not a good idea. If this was a cast iron head, that's a much older design, you might want to check it for cracks and get it fixed. This is a cylinder head that is aluminum. It's never a good idea. So here's what we're going to do with this one. I'm going to change these spark plugs. Let me get my straight edge out of the way, because I do not want today to be the day that we drop this or damage it. We're going to replace the valve stem seals. We're going to clean this really well. Check the valve clearance. This is an old school Toyota design with the shims. There's little shims sit here. That's what sets the valve clearance. And we're going to call it a day. I don't see a reason why this cylinder head needs to be sent to a machine shop when this is a new service engine. Again, we go back to the same thing. Now, there are a few things we're going to check when we get the valves off. Like, is this valve seated? Usually I lap the valves just to make sure we have a good seat. And then the guides need to be checked. But other than that, if we see anything of this stuff, then it needs to go to a machine shop to get things worked on. Otherwise, I don't see an issue. And as far as why did the head gasket leak, let me show you the surface on this particular cylinder head that we haven't cleaned yet. This is how that looks like. You see this black stuff all over the place? This is basically the material of the head gasket falling apart from just age. You see, this cylinder head should have looked all like this, all this black material. Well, it's not. In the particular case of this engine, I believe this cylinder head was not the one that was leaking. I think it was this one. That's why we heavily got into this one. But we still haven't checked this one. I'm going to clean it up, do the same thing. If everything checks out, then we're going to go ahead and do it. I am curious about these exhaust manifolds, which is another common thing with these Line Cruisers. I would want to take them apart, check them for cracks, although this is not a rusty one, but still give the customer the option. If you want them replaced, this would be the time to do it, not 2 years from now, and you'll pay full labor. These are very difficult to replace, but they're out right now. If you want to replace them, this will be the time. Now, other stuff that are unique to this engine that I want you guys to see it. One of the biggest things that people dislike about this engine is the location of the starter. And look, I don't blame you. It's a little bit of a hard job to get to it. See, the starter sits right here. This is actually the wire. The wire for the starter is right here, and this is the S terminal. People have said it's not the best place. Yes, it is not the best place in the planet. But the reason they did that, did you know that this engine was actually certified for airplane use? Never used in an airplane, but it was actually certified. And they put the starter in the middle to keep this engine balanced. This engine is possibly one of the smoothest running engines you will ever see. There was probably a few that come close, but this is definitely one of the top ones. And that's one of the reasons. You don't have weight hanging off one side that's imbalanced. It's a very balanced engine. And you have the starter sitting in the middle, so it wouldn't hang from the side. So the owner of this car wanted the starter replaced. Here's how that looks like. It has been replaced before with an original one, because this says Toyota remanufactured. But he figured we're this far into it, let's put a new starter, and I'm not going to argue with him at that point. Now, one thing about this starter, if you're ever doing one of these starters, people assume removing the intake manifold, which, by the way, this is the intake manifold, people assume that removing the intake manifold is the toughest part. That's actually the easy part. Truth have to be said. This is a very easy intake manifold to remove. The problem is the bolts. There are two bolts right there at the very end that go from the other way. That's what's difficult to remove, not really the intake manifold. Once you get these two bolts, I mean, the intake manifold is not hard at all. I think it's a better place for it because it's not exposed to elements and oil leaks and all kinds of stuff. It's nice and safe. When it does go out eventually, which nothing lasts forever, a little bit more involved to replace it, but I'll take this over the new V8 any day, which is right underneath the exhaust manifold. But let's talk about a few things with this engine. So this is a 99, so this does not have VVTi, so it's a little bit simpler. Not very simple, but still. This is the exhaust cam. There's something very, very important about this exhaust cam. Do you notice how this exhaust cam gear, it has two gears, and they're spring loaded. You notice this bolt. When you remove this exhaust cam, you have to install this bolt. If you don't, these two gears will go out of mesh, and it's a very cumbersome process to get them realigned and retightened. Always read the manual, folks. This is very important that you put this bolt in the right order when you take these out. I've seen this mistake happen, and things will rattle, and we'll have all kinds of problems. Now, the cams themselves, I'm looking at everything here. I mean, again, we're talking about a Land Cruiser here. These cams are not even worn. They have absolutely nothing wrong with them. Look beautiful. And that's the same story with all of them. Then we look here. There's this massive cam seal. We haven't even gotten it out yet. And then you look at the caps for the cams. 200,000 miles, folks. There is absolutely no wear. Nothing. That's how the Land Cruiser is. And this engine in particular. This looks like a lot. This job, it's not a difficult job, but the biggest problem with this is reach and access. I mean, this truck is lifted a little bit, and we have this bar in the front. This bar makes life a lot harder. The hardest thing about this is access. You notice how low this is. So basically, when we're pulling this heavy cylinder head out of here, we have to lean in, and you're stretching, and you clean. You have to climb in and almost sit here to be able to clean it. That's really what adds most of the labor. But otherwise, if you have this engine sitting on an engine stand, it's not a very difficult engine to tear apart. One thing I wanted to show you about this engine that is interesting, and you might find interesting. Let's do the other one. You know, we have a loose one here. The valve adjustments. So these are buckets. This is the old school bucket style. So there's two styles of these. Some of them, the whole bucket has a number on the side of it, and you replace the whole bucket to increase or decrease the valve clearance. And basically, this sits on the valve, and this is where the cam would push on the valve, and that's how you adjust it. But this is the old style bucket, where we have these little shims that sit on the tip of the valve, and that's what actually adjusts the valve clearance, not the bucket itself. I thought I'd mention this because this is usually these don't have a lot of issues, and the standard procedure is you keep them exactly where they are and you measure. Once you assemble, though, not when you're disassembling. You check them. If they're good, they're good. And in my experience, so many of them has been good that they don't wear out. Valve adjustment is not needed as much on these Toyota engines, even though they have a valve adjustment. You just don't need it. And speaking of this massive V8, in case you don't know what V8 we're talking about, This block, take one last look at it before we move on, and I'll show you how this looks like when it's all together. We walk over to this beautiful V8 4Runner, and this is the exact same engine right here. This is how that looks like. Not exactly. This is a 4Runner V8. That's a Land Cruiser V8. Small things, but this is exactly how that engine looks like. Very intimidating. There is a few revisions with this engine and few models, and there's a 1 UZ and there's a 2 UZ. The biggest change in the UZ engine happened, I want to say around 2004, 3, somewhere in that range. They added VVTi and they added secondary air injection. Not in all models, but these were the revisions. And then they changed the intake manifold to a plastic one. And don't take plastic as a bad thing. And it's one of the best, just the highest quality intake manifolds you'll ever see. The VVTi added a little bit more complication with the cam seals, and the secondary air injection adds a lot more complication when you go to do the starter, because you have the valves in your way, and it's a big project, let's put it this way. But folks, this is the green Land Cruiser that you all have been asking about. It is in for a head gasket. We finally got around to actually addressing it. I have to say, I usually don't like zip ties, but in my opinion, this is what you use zip ties for, just to hold stuff out of your way, not to secure stuff long term. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.